Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series. Who's Nintendo suing this week and why are they suing them? But it isn't technically a lawsuit we're talking about tonight. It's the new end user license agreement from Nintendo for both Europe as well as America that talks about the fact that Nintendo states that they may make your Switch 2 completely unoperable if you do anything they consider to be infringing. I'm going to explain to you exactly what that means and what it could mean because it is still day zero of this news. But basically Nintendo's been stepping in it with fans basically every chance they get between the patent infringement lawsuits with Pocket Pair and Palworld, with all of the different emulation lawsuits they have going on. Nintendo definitely isn't trying to make any friends anytime soon. They do not want to be your pal, pun very much intended, and we've gone over the entire saga of them suing Yuzu, removing Ryujinx with the developer, going through all of the different mod chips that they hate and have sued and got settlements for. Basically Nintendo is on a full court press when it comes to emulation and using any of their games in ways they don't want you to do, and now they're going even harder with Switch 2, because it does make sense that Nintendo is a little bit worried about emulation on Switch 2, because obviously Switch, a current gen system, being able to be emulated was not helpful to Nintendo. They did not like it, and that's why you saw stuff like the Yuzu emulation settlement where they won $2.4 million and Yuzu disappeared, or the fact that they've been going after all of the different game sharing sites, and that is totally their prerogative. They can do it. We don't have to like it, but it is Nintendo here. But now suddenly they seem to be going a little bit further with these new agreements, because they specifically state that if you do something they don't like, including reverse engineering the hardware, trying to emulate on it, they can make the device inoperable either in full or in part. And that is definitely a statement further than you would expect. Now, I don't know if Nintendo actually means that they're going to break your console or not as far as playing games offline is concerned, but blacklisting your console from the online service, including all of the game updates and downloads, they would be within their right to do. And before you think to yourself, it doesn't matter to me whatsoever because I'm not going to do anything I shouldn't do with Switch 2, trust me, it could actually end up affecting you even if you don't participate in any of the things Nintendo does not like. With the original Switch, if you were to buy a used game that was unfortunately used to dump online and had shown up on Nintendo servers pinging with that unique serial code more than once, you could actually end up with your Switch blacklisted from Nintendo online servers. Think about it this way: if you have a game key card or a game from Switch 2 that you bought used, and that game was used to do something that Nintendo didn't like, once you pop it into your Switch 2 as the second consumer that bought it from a store perfectly legally, you could still end up on the wrong side of Nintendo, and good luck convincing them that you didn't do it in the first place. They've been going hard, a full court press against everything they hate right now, and they're not going to listen to you, the end consumer, when it comes to, but it wasn't me. Now, this was changed as of May 2025, and it was done overnight into this morning. This is the agreement that you have to sign digitally on every Switch 2 when you open it up out of the box and try to actually use the thing. Every single digital device these days has an end user license agreement, and nobody spends any time reading them, but I definitely got into it a little bit. Number 2 license here talks about all of the stuff that you can't do: reverse engineer, modify, lease, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute, offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo account services. Basically, this means modifying the device to do anything other than Nintendo wants it to do. But there's one very particular line here that you need to pay attention to. You acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing restrictions, Nintendo may render the account, services, and or the applicable Nintendo device, emphasis on device, permanently unusable in whole or in part. In part would mean blacklisted from the online platform as well as updates, but in whole means technically they're saying they could break your Switch 2 and it would never run another game again. It would be nothing more than a paperweight, and that is absolutely scary language from Nintendo. Now, if they started to actually completely brick Switch 2s and you couldn't use it whatsoever, I imagine that law firms would be salivating over the class action lawsuit against Nintendo. I even think you'd have the government stepping in, because no one has ever tried to do that in mass before, and I do not think it would work out in Nintendo's favor. So I'm not trying to say it's likely that they do this, I'm saying that the end user license agreement says they could. But do remember, just because you write something in an end user license agreement does not mean it's enforceable by law. If it would be illegal, just because you sign that agreement doesn't suddenly make it legal for Nintendo. And so many companies love to abuse this end user license agreement to try to get you to think that things aren't allowed. Now technically still, at least on the laws in the books, if you're somehow able to get an emulator on Switch 2, if you wanted to emulate PlayStation 1, then technically that reverse engineering would be protected and you should be able to do it. Now of course this is a very old precedent and there's a bunch of different ones out there that people love to argue about, but technically what Nintendo is saying you can't do, in some parts you can do, at least in the United States. And again, I want to stress this video is US focused, but the European end user license agreement says that they can make your system or the game not functional in part, and that just sounds like blacklisting. It's interesting that they have a different set of language for the United States versus Europe and the rest of the world. And you'll see here on the UK it says digital products may result in the digital product becoming unusable. That means maybe whatever you downloaded from the online store or those updates or keycards would no longer function on a Switch 2 if you did something with a device that drew Nintendo's ire and they decided to blacklist your console. And because every console has a unique serial number and key, it's a situation where they can immediately find out what you're doing and they can flag you for it. And I'll explain how they do that in just a moment. But again, permanently unusable in whole. The only way you could read that would mean that your entire Nintendo Switch 2, that $450 brand new console you just purchased, would do absolutely nothing. Even if you never logged in online, if you bought a game card and put it in, if Nintendo sent that brick file down to your Switch 2, it is as good as dead. You're just going to have to buy another one. Now again, I don't think they're going to do this, but they could. And additionally, they're going to be recording all of your game chats if you let them. I'm sure you want to keep them from doing that. But the question truly is, would Nintendo be stupid enough to actually try to brick your device so that you couldn't play it offline? And the question has no answer because we just have to wait and see what Nintendo's going to do. Obviously, with their heavy hand lately, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to do this, but maybe only on a case-by-case basis, 10 here, 20 there, stuff that wouldn't really raise up to the class action lawsuit level, and they could kind of just go under the radar. And if you're wondering if this happened before, Roku technically quote-unquote bricked devices if you wouldn't actually agree to the end user license agreement, but that's not really that strange. Honestly, there really isn't a great case that I can find and point to say if a company can brick your device just because you did something online with it you didn't like. That would be like Valve trying to say they're going to brick your Windows PC because you did something on Steam that they didn't appreciate. Now with Steam Deck that might be a different question, but it's one of those things we kind of have to interpret this because there is no true answer. But I really do think what they're trying to say, even though they say in its entirety, is that you're going to get blacklisted if you do anything wrong with your Switch 2, and that's definitely something Nintendo has done in the past with the original Switch as well, so let's talk about that. If you were to get pinged doing something on your Nintendo Switch and you were connecting to Nintendo servers, they would blacklist that console. If you're using cheats, if you're using games on your Switch, that those serial numbers are already on the servers activated, that is how Nintendo finds you, and that basically means that you're not going to have access to your Nintendo Switch Online account anymore. You're not going to be able to use the eShop, but you can still put games in your Switch and they will still run locally. So it's not like if you pick up your Switch and it's blacklisted, you're not going to be able to play a game that you just plug in with no internet, which is something different than what Nintendo is saying with Switch 2 and their end user license agreement about the fact that they can make it inoperable in its entirety. And if you're wondering what you get bans for, there's a ton of different things: modded games, cheating at online games, the serial numbers that have been duplicated over. But again, I can't stress enough, just because you don't plan on doing anything wrong with your Switch 2 doesn't mean you couldn't get caught up in this. Here is your scenario. You go ahead and buy a Switch game from GameStop and it is used, and you bring it home and you put it in your Switch 2. By this point in time, people have figured out, at least in this imaginary world, that you can dump the games and run them on a Switch 2. So Nintendo knows that this game's serial number, the game that should only have one instance, has been activated 100 times. You put that used game in your Switch 2, it pings the update server, and all of a sudden Nintendo flags your console as doing something that they do not permit. And trust me, humans don't look at these things, it is just an AI system. And then they ban your console because you just happened to buy the wrong copy of the game at GameStop, even though you thought you were doing everything right. And your Switch, and I'm sure the Switch 2, records all of that different telemetry data, the data of what you're doing on it, and reports it back to Nintendo. So you do need to be careful about these things. Maybe you don't want to buy any used games whatsoever. Maybe you just want to buy them new, and maybe that's something Nintendo wants you to do. But it specifically says render the Nintendo account services and or the applicable Nintendo device, i.e. the Switch or Switch 2, permanently unusable in whole. And the only way to read that is that Nintendo is threatening to break your Switch 2 and make it completely unusable for absolutely anything. And again, do I think they're going to do that? I do not know. I'm using their own language and talking about it. So before you go down into the comments below and yell clickbait or fear-mongering, Nintendo wrote it, I just report on it. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think Nintendo's going to do, but I honestly think they're going to go a little bit crazy. But I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.